It begins in the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy, suffocating kind that settles in after the last message goes unanswered. You stare at the screen. The glow reflects in your eyes, casting long shadows across a room that suddenly feels too large, too empty. You replay the final exchange, scanning for the exact moment the temperature dropped. There was no explosion, no slammed door, just a slow, deliberate withdrawal that left you standing in the middle of a conversation that suddenly had no air. You text, you call, you leave the door cracked, hoping he'll slip back through. But he doesn't, and the silence stretches. It becomes a mirror, and in it, you start to wonder what you did wrong, what you could have phrased differently, how you became someone he needed to escape. You carry that confusion like a stone pressed against your ribs. You tell yourself you're just being patient, just giving him space. But underneath, there's a quiet panic, a whisper that says you're slipping away from him, and you don't know how to stop the drift. You keep reaching, you keep explaining, you keep hoping your love will be loud enough to drown out his retreat. Here is the truth you've been avoiding. You didn't lose him because you loved him too much. You lost him because you tried to fix the distance with more presence. Every follow-up message, every gentle check-in, every carefully worded plea for clarity, you thought it was connection. He experienced it as pressure. The harder you reached, the tighter he closed. You were speaking the language of reassurance. His nervous system was reading it as a demand. And when you keep handing someone a rope they don't want, they don't grab it. They step back. They watch you pull. They wait for you to tire. Because the unspoken rule of human psychology is brutally simple. What chases is chased away. What withdraws is pursued. You kept making yourself available. Available to be ignored. Available to be analyzed. Available to be kept on a shelf while he figured out if he wanted to feel anything at all. And in doing so, you taught him exactly how little he had to give to keep you close. You confused availability with devotion. You confused pursuit with proof. And he learned, slowly but surely, that he never had to match your energy. He only had to endure it until it burned out. This isn't a moral failure. It's a neurological pattern. When someone carries an avoidant attachment architecture, closeness doesn't register as warmth. It registers as a threat. The amygdala, that ancient alarm system buried deep in the temporal lobe, doesn't distinguish between a loving embrace and a perceived loss of autonomy. Both trigger the same survival cascade. Cortisol floods the bloodstream, heart rate climbs, breath shallows. The prefrontal cortex, the part of you that plans, rationalizes, and loves, goes temporarily offline. The body prepares for survival, not intimacy. In that state, affection feels heavy. Texts feel like obligations. Your steady presence becomes a weight he doesn't know how to carry. Meanwhile, your nervous system is doing the exact opposite. It's starving for dopamine. Every unanswered message creates a chemical withdrawal loop. You check your phone. Nothing. You check again. The anticipation spikes. The crash follows. You are caught in a biological tug-of-war. Your brain is begging for resolution. His brain is begging for space. And because you're wired to bridge gaps, you keep stepping into the void. But space cannot be filled with pursuit. It can only be honored. Or it expands. You cannot outlove a nervous system that interprets love as captivity. You cannot reason with a body that has already decided to run. He didn't stop caring. He drowned. Somewhere along the way, the emotional volume turned up too high. Maybe it was the pace. Maybe it was the expectations you didn't even voice, but he felt them anyway. The quiet assumption that love means constant alignment, constant availability, constant reassurance. His system overloaded. And when a nervous system overloads, it doesn't negotiate. It shuts down. The silence you're experiencing isn't indifference. It's a circuit breaker. He pulled the plug because the current was burning him. He stepped back not to punish you, but to remember how to breathe. The tragedy isn't that he left. The tragedy is that you interpreted his retreat as a verdict on your worth. You turned his need for air into proof that you weren't enough. And so you tried harder. You leaned in, you gave more. You became a lighthouse in a storm he never asked for. And lighthouses don't pull ships to shore. They just stand there, burning, while the water keeps rising. You kept offering yourself as a solution to a problem that was never yours to fix. And in the process, you forgot who you were before the waiting began. This is where everything shifts. Not through another grand gesture, not through a perfectly timed message, not through a conversation you've rehearsed in your head 100 times, but through one deliberate, unshakable choice. You become unreachable. Not as revenge, not as a game, but as a boundary. You step out of the cycle of anticipation. You stop feeding the anxiety loop. You stop measuring your value by his response time. You let the silence sit. You let it do its work. Non-reactivity isn't coldness. It's nervous system regulation. It's the quiet refusal to let your peace depend on someone else's capacity to show up. When you stop chasing, you stop broadcasting need. And need, no matter how beautifully packaged, repels the very connection you're trying to secure. Detachment is not the absence of love. It's the presence of self-respect. It's the moment you decide that your emotional oxygen will no longer be rationed by someone who treats your presence as optional. You don't withdraw to manipulate. You withdraw to recalibrate. And in that recalibration, something irreversible happens. The dynamic fractures. The old script burns. And for the first time, you're not playing a role. You're just existing. Fully. Unapologetically. Unreachable. Watch what happens in the space you create. The first few days, he feels relief. The pressure lifts. He breathes easier. He tells himself he made the right call. But relief is temporary. The human brain doesn't like unresolved loops. It starts scanning. He notices the quiet. He checks his phone, expecting the familiar ping. It doesn't come. He tells himself he's fine. He scrolls through his day. But curiosity is a slow burn. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps in. He replays your last conversation. He notices the absence of your voice in his daily rhythm. The dopamine that once came easily from your attention now has nowhere to land. His nervous system, wired for predictability, starts misfiring. Who is he without your pursuit? He remembers the way you used to look at him, the way you held space before he learned to fill it with distance. He starts to miss you. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, in quiet, intrusive flashes. A song on a coffee shop radio, a street you used to walk, a phrase you used to say when he was tired. He catches himself wondering what you're doing, who you're talking to, why you're not trying anymore. And that wondering is the first crack in the wall. He begins to test the waters. A casual text, a memory shared, a question disguised as coincidence. He's not reaching out because he's ready. He's reaching out because the silence got loud. Because absence taught him what presence never could. You didn't win him back. You simply stopped losing yourself. And in that stillness, he finally saw what he was running from. Not you. Himself. But listen carefully. This is where most people ruin it. They mistake detachment for a waiting room. They step back, count the days, and keep one eye on the door. They use silence as a trap instead of a threshold. And the nervous system always knows the difference. You cannot fake non-reactivity. You cannot perform detachment while secretly auditing his every move. You cannot step away with your body while your mind stays chained to his timeline. The moment you use stillness as a strategy to control him, you hand the power right back. The pattern resets. The chase resumes. The obsession fades into the familiar dance of pursuit and retreat. If you step away to reclaim your life, not to engineer his return. You don't monitor his stories. You don't draft unsent messages. You don't keep the shelf empty hoping he'll finally sit in it. You fill it. You move. You build a world that doesn't revolve around his hesitation. Because if he comes back, it won't be because you mastered a psychological trick. It will be because you became someone who no longer needs him to validate your existence. And that changes everything. Or it changes nothing. Either way, you win. But only if you mean it. Only if the silence you offer him is the same silence you've finally given yourself. You were never meant to beg for a seat at a table you built. You were meant to stop asking for permission to occupy your own life. The woman who becomes unreachable isn't running from love. She's running toward herself. She stops translating his distance into her deficiency. She stops treating her tenderness as a liability. She learns that self-worth isn't negotiated. It's claimed. In the quiet, in the boundaries, in the refusal to shrink so someone else can feel comfortable. You don't need to be constantly available to be deeply loved. You need to be deeply whole. And wholeness doesn't announce itself. It radiates. It doesn't chase. It attracts. It doesn't plead. It provokes. When you stop making yourself reachable on his terms, you stop being an option. You become a presence. And presence cannot be ignored. It can only be met or missed. And if he misses you, let him. If he returns, let him prove he knows how to stay. But do not shrink your gravity to fit his orbit. You are not a backup plan for someone who only knows how to want you when you're gone. You are the standard. You are the calm after the storm you survived. You are the woman who learned that silence isn't empty. It's full of power. And in that power, you don't lose love. You finally meet it. On your terms. Unshaken. Unreachable. Complete.